So welcome everyone. Thanks very much for showing up on our first webinar. It's one of four, so we'll have a series of 4 webinars. This one is devoted to rainbow families in Europe. And our second webinar will be devoted to rainbow families in Poland and will be held by the lawyer Anna Mazurczak. So I also encourage you to sign up for it. We'll soon be posting adverts about it. Our speaker today is Björn Sieverding, Vice President of Nelfa, a journalist and also a proud father. As I said before, we'll have a 1-hour presentation and then a discussion, which possibly can be followed by some more presentation depending on how our meeting develops. So Björn, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Asha. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the possibility to speak up because I really adore to talk about rainbow families issues and about the comparison of different countries in the European framework, what rights exist in these countries, in those countries. And so I hope it won't be too boring for you. And if there are any questions, just raise them in between or wait for a certain time and then you will see that we can discuss it afterwards. I will share now my screen with you. This is the presentation. I hope I find it now. Yes, rainbow families in Europe, children's rights at stake. And the idea of this presentation is already a little bit older. 2 years ago, we had a Nelfa meeting in Helsinki where we discussed children's rights. And we thought as Nelfa, as European network of LGBTIQ families associations, that right now we are mostly talking about LGBTIQ rights. But of course, in rainbow families, it's not only about the parents who define themselves as LGBTIQ, but it's also about the children and their rights, possibly without any connection then over the fathers and mothers to LGBTIQ. So finally, there are some more rights to respect. And also in when we take this perspective of children, then it might be also easier for us to, yes, to get support, yes, because it's not the trigger LGBTIQ, but it's perhaps more the trigger of children that are involved. And normally, I would say, everyone would like to do everything for the well-being of the children. But of course, there are different approaches to that, and perhaps we have not the same, we don't think the same when we talk about children's rights. So what I will do now in this presentation is to connect the perspective of children's rights together with rainbow families' rights within the European framework, so the Council of Europe framework, but also a little bit more particularly with a view on the European Union, because Nelfa is seated in Brussels. So we are in a constant contact to the EU institutions and try to raise awareness about rainbow families. So to start, I try now to start, but this don't, now, yeah. Perhaps it's easy for you also to follow up when you know a little bit more about Nelfa. What is Nelfa? So Nelfa is a network and we exist now, yes, around 10 years. So next year will be the anniversary of Nelfa as NGO. Officially created in 2012 in Brussels. And we have now 41 organizations, national organizations within the network, and cover more than 30 countries. And you see already all these colorful logos, yes, from Hungary to, I don't know, Spain, Czechia to Belgium. Croatia is, of course, also here in the group, and also the Polish group from Poznan, Fundacja Tęczowe Rodziny. So, well, our main goals as group is, of course, at first, the Rainbow Families Exchange. So we try to organize meetings and to see each other, to share experiences, but of course also via email and social media, visibility in general. Yes, best practices, how to achieve rights, some nice campaigns together. This is the one side, and the other side is then mostly the work of the board of Nelfer. So we have a board of 12, 13 members. Advocacy work at European level means, yes, to make workshop like this one, seminars, conferences, where we share speeches, where we try to raise awareness about rainbow families and their rights and the lack of rights. Well, after all, so when we see what is also Nelfer, we do also some capacity building through Erasmus Plus projects, for example, and we give legal support, but this is really on a very low basis. Yes, this is first aid, we can say, means we try to connect people, rainbow families in trouble, with lawyers or other organization who could better take care than us, because we are normally, yes, rainbow families, and just on a voluntary basis, and we need, of course, the support of many other allies to go through. So this is Nelfer, and when we look at our mission in general, yes, we want to ensure that our children have the same rights as others. And to know what are the rights of the children and of LGBTIQ people, it's difficult to say, yes, because so many different angles to see, and there are so many possibilities to look at it. For me, it's always easy to start at a written paper, at some rights that exist already. And one of those major documents is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Very general, not so old, yes, from 1990, ratified by most of the countries and nations of the world, except of the USA. And they are bound by international law. It is not always so clear what does it mean at the end, but there is at least a committee, the UNCRC, so the Committee on the Rights of the Child, seated in Geneva, who looks at those cases involving children's rights, and when there is an infringement, they have the possibility to start a complaint against that country and to ask for reparation, for example. How we can use it, or what is now the point for rainbow families. If we look at this Convention on the Rights of the Child, there are more than 50 articles. And of course, not every article is linked to the rights in rainbow families. But some of them, and you will see in the course of this presentation that some of them are really very relevant. And when we argument from the children's rights perspective and children in rainbow families, we can use these articles. And the first ones are Article 2, Article 3, very, very general, but still very important, yet the non-discrimination. And here's already a key point, the non-discrimination also by association to the child's parents' status, activities, and so on. And we could say, yes, also by association to the child's parents' sexual orientation. So whenever there is a question of gender identity or sexual orientation, we should consider that the children are perhaps discriminated against when their parents are discriminated against. The primary consideration are the child's best interests is Article 3. We have Article 7, also very important for rainbow families, because immediate registration, right to a name, nationality, and as far as possible, the right to know and to be cared by her parents. And also protection against statelessness. We will see this is an important point. Article 7, no separation from parents against the child's will. Article 10, family reunification. Article 12, the child shall be provided the opportunity to be heard. Also a very important point at the moment in the European framework, because they actually try to make a strategy on children's rights, and this point to be heard, that children are involved in decisions, is quite an important point. Yes, to state some other articles, perhaps Article 28 is also very important, the right of the child to education, and Article 29, this shall be directed to the development of the child's personality, respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms, and then respect for the child's parents in the spirit of understanding, peace, tolerance, equality of sexes. Well, of course, you see what I already stated, best interest of the child. I guess that your government, my government, we all have different meanings of the best interest of the child. And of course, such a general convention is still gives a lot of space. Yes, definition of parents, biological parents. Is this a biological link, or does it mean more the functional parent? The primary caregiver could be also a parent without any biological link, but this is not clear in the convention. We don't know exactly what does it mean, parents. And also the question if there are possibly more than two parents. Who determines the best interests of the child? Yes, what is it really? This is also a discussion, I guess. And there is also in the whole convention no direct reference to gender identity or sexual orientation. So it's also just an assumption from my side that the points I raised before are relevant for rainbow families, because it's not really very, very clear. But this is also very new. In February, there was a first judgment or decision of this committee I mentioned before. There was a case, an asylum case between Russia and Finland, and a rainbow family with a child from Russia who applied for asylum in Finland because of their situation through the homo propaganda law in Russia. But this was rejected by the government in Helsinki. And we started together with ILGA, this is the LGBTIQ umbrella organization in Brussels, and with other human rights and children's rights organizations, a complaint. This is a complaint that took a long time, yes, around 5 years, we have to state, but still, finally, with a positive decision. That means the committee decided for the first time on a case involving sexual orientation and involving a child in a rainbow family. And they saw also the problem that in Russia, they were persecuted and Finland had to give asylum to the family. They didn't, and so they need to pay reparation. So we see that even a very general convention now was used in a positive way for rainbow families to see, yes, these children's rights were infringed, and there was a solution at the end to see that Finland did it wrong, and they were punished for this. When we look now into the rights of the families or LGBTIQ rights, it's also derived from general human rights, and we can look into the European Convention on Human Rights, so the whole Council of Europe area, and connected to this, as binding judgments through the European Court of Human Rights. And I know that there are a lot of Polish cases already at this level to be decided for a lot of reasons. And those articles who are the most relevant for rainbow families are Article 8, yes, the respect for one's private and family life. Article 12, yes, right to marry and to establish a family, still a little bit difficult because same-sex marriage itself is not yet included, but there is a positive obligation to at least ensure a legal framework for the recognition and protection of same-sex couples. So there was some years ago a case from Italy, and it was restricted to Italy. So Italy had to provide a civil union law, but after all, settled case law says that normally all the other countries as well need to provide at least a registered partnership.
Are you unmute, Björn?
Sorry, Björn, I muted you by accident. And
oh,
now
okay.
Okay, sorry.
No problem. So, yes, so I don't know what did you hear at last. So I was just talking about the need to establish at least civil unions from the perspective of Strasbourg. And Article 14, the prohibition of discrimination, is also one of these points. But still here, sexual orientation isn't mentioned in the convention. So it is just, yes, also through settled case law that sexual orientation is involved. Better or more inclusive is the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is also derived from the Convention of Human Rights for the European Union, signed, yes, in 2009. Normally, we have this very similar rights in other articles. So here, for example, this respect for private and family life in Article 7. We have here also very important then the connection to the Convention on the Rights of the Child in Article 24. It is also very similar, but yes, very short. Yes, protection and care for the children. They may express their views freely, a primary consideration of the child's best interests. So you see here this strong connection to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And then we have other articles that are also related to family rights and possibly to rainbow families, because there is the need, yes, to have legal, social, and economic protection, paid maternity leave, paternal leave, the right to petition, and also Article 45, freedom of movement and the freedom of residence. And this is something I will, yes, explain a little bit later why this is also very, very important. So this is the rights, but now we have the legal situation. Of course, you can imagine this is not the same, unfortunately. And a very good tool to look into the rights of rainbow families and of children in rainbow families is the Rainbow Europe map or package, whatever, of ILGA Europe. And these are here the results of 2020. So last year, it is always in May that the new study comes. And on the left, you see the general map. So where are the conditions of human rights connected to LGBTIQ people in general good, and where they are not so good? And all these green countries are good, and unfortunately the others not so good. And you see here Poland with 16%, well, mostly in the part, unfortunately, of the bad countries. And on the right, you see the parts, the section which is taken out of the survey just for family rights. So this is really just about marriage equality, the access to civil unions, the possibility of joint adoption, the access to assisted reproductive techniques, trans parenthood, and all these together mixed up will show this map. And the darker the countries are, the better the possibilities for rainbow families to be recognized as families. Perhaps this is easier here to see in this list. Yes, this is once again only EU. Yes, at the top, Belgium, Malta, Sweden. In the middle, France, Germany, Slovenia already a little bit worse. And yes, the situation then starts to be not so good in Hungary, Croatia, Italy, and then these 6 countries where we have nearly no rights for rainbow families. Begins with Latvia, Bulgaria, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia. It's perhaps too much really to look into all these different points, but just to raise here, and you see here these circles, yes, marriage equality, for example. You see nearly half of the countries have introduced marriage equality. With civil unions, the situation is much better. So in the whole Council of Europe region, there are already 26 countries that provide registered partnerships in any form. There are still, unfortunately, in the Council of Europe region, 19 countries with constitutional limitations. So where, for example, constitutions or civil codes say marriage is only between man and woman. And we have, what I stated already, no recognition for any kind of civil union or marriage equality in these countries I mentioned before. So now, and this I will do it sometimes, for the first time, I try now to connect the rights with the legal situation. My argumentation is that children are deprived of their rights. So, for example, their best interests, non-discrimination by association to their parents' gender identity, sexual orientation, whenever their LGBTIQ parents can't get married or enter at least in a civil union. Why? Because marriage means, of course, more obligations and benefits also for the child at the end. So access to tax credits, common health care, inheritance rights. Then, of course, yes, for example, joint adoption rights. It's always connected to marriage. In every country, there's only one country that provides for joint adoption for same-sex couples without marriage equality, and this is Andorra. But Andorra will introduce marriage equality very soon, possibly in summer. Then parenthood presumption. So when you are married, you are automatically, in a lot of countries, automatically legal parent to your child. And then the question of access to assisted reproductive techniques, or also the access to funding. In Germany, for example, we have not really access to assisted reproductive techniques. It exists, yes, but there is no real law. Clinics do that, but there is no funding for same-sex couples. Only in one region where this is now, so in the region of Rhineland-Palatinate, this is the first region of Germany where this is also provided for same-sex couples. And one example, if you see what does it mean, for example, the differences between marriage and registered partnerships. In Czechia, there are 105 legal provisions that are not the same. For example, parenting rights. So if you are only in a civil union, this will mean already that you can't get adoption rights, stepchild adoption. If you are married, you would have the right to do it. And the same for property rights. And I guess it was 2 weeks ago, I learned that even to rent a parking slot is something that married people can do better than those in civil unions in Czechia. So at the end, to summarize this from the perspective of marriage equality, children in 14 EU countries might suffer disadvantages because their LGBTIQ parents can't get married. And in 6 countries, parents' relations are not recognized at all. And these are the countries: Bulgaria, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Slovakia. So you see, this is, of course, a general reflection on it, and marriage equality is possibly not the most important one, but I guess much more important is the legal connection between parents and children. And when we look here, joint adoption is also half of the countries in the European Union that provide for joint adoption. Second parent adoption is already a little bit more complicated, but we have here already in the whole Council of Europe area, 20 countries that know any form of parenthood rights between same-sex parents and children, means mostly those who are not biologically connected to their children. So is there any possibility for the non-biological parent to be recognized? And there are different forms. Yes, it begins with yes, adoption, so second parent adoption in several forms. And the best form for us is an automatic co-parent recognition. And you see this, for example, yes, it is still on a basis which is not so broad. We have it in Norway, in Denmark, in the Netherlands, Belgium, UK, Spain, Portugal, Austria, Malta, and Ireland. Ireland joined the family in 2020, in last May. And we have to add some countries, they are not in the list of ILGA Europe. So Finland and Slovenia also provide for an automatic co-parent recognition. And there is a strong debate now in France, in Switzerland, Germany, if you need to change the law of descent to make this a reality for lesbian couples, mostly that they are already parents to their child from birth. Mostly this is about the treatment in a clinic or through marital presumption. So if you are married, then you are automatically a parent to your child. And only yesterday, there was a decision in Sweden. So we have already in Sweden the right of lesbian couples to become jointly parents through a treatment in a local clinic, in a Swedish clinic with a known donor. But now we have it also whenever they are already married, then it's automatically that they are legal parents. So what does this mean for the child? Again, children are deprived of their rights, best interests, and so on, whenever their LGBTIQ primary caregivers can't become legal parents. Joint parenthood means more protection, more benefits. Remaining legal ties in the case of a death or illness of the biological parent, parental leave, access to healthcare, traveling, decision-making for school. So it's really very relevant. If you are not a legal parent to your child, it can be very difficult. And one example, in the European Union, 2 years ago, there was the Gender Equality Index that showed and revealed that rainbow families have only a restricted access to parental leave. So whenever they are not biologically connected to the child, they won't have, in many countries, the possibility to get parental leave. Here was they stated 11 countries. So again, if you look at joint parenthood, children can have 2 parents in 17 EU member states. Meanwhile, without the UK, you see it here only in the list. 10 of them offer forms of co-parent recognition, of direct co-parent recognition. 5 additional countries, at least forms of second parent adoption, including Croatia. There is a sort of second parent adoption, and 2 additional countries where you can get parental rights through a court decision, for example, in Italy, and you get, for example, after 2 years of living together, guardianship in Ireland. In Ireland, we saw that we have now also this automatic co-parent recognition, but only for those who have a known donor and who did their treatment in an Irish clinic. So whenever you do it abroad and whenever you don't know the sperm donor directly, then you won't have the possibility to be recognized. Means at the end, in 10 member states, children are deprived of their right and the possibility to have 2 legal parents. Another angle that is not discussed in the framework of the ILGA rainbow map is foster care. And we see here also a point: children are deprived of their rights whenever they don't have the full choice to find adequate new caregivers, possibly LGBTIQ people and couples. And we know that still, this is a campaign from Eurochild, also a children's rights organization in the European bubble. There are still between 345,000 to 360,000 children living in the institutions, and they want to provide more places in families. And so I am personally involved because I am also a foster family. So we have 2 children through foster care. And what I learned from German institutions is that in some cases, it can be relevant to have same-sex parents. In our case, it was the mother was still in contact with us at the beginning, and it was good to have 2 dads at the end because she was still the mother. She was never questioned with another second mother. So in our case, they raised the question that it was good to have 2 dads and not another mother because of this concurrence situation. And it's in other cases, we know that sometimes lesbian couples are good. For example, when the children experienced abuse by a man. So sometimes this can be good not to be connected then to a new foster family, including a man. And so to have the full choice means also to provide the possibility to other applicants. And this could be also same-sex parents, because they are at the end as good as others to provide love, care, and responsibility. And we have one positive example here in Croatia. There was a long debate on registered partners, if they can be foster parents. And at the end of a long battle before the courts, this couple here, Ivo Mladen, got the possibility to become foster parents. So at the end, they became foster parents of 2 boys. And I guess quite lucky, but we have someone here who can provide more information on that. Again, yes, here is, after a survey, we searched for the rights of same-sex couples or single persons who have access to foster care. And we see again, in Eastern Europe, it's quite difficult. There are some countries that doesn't provide at all for LGBTIQ people. And yes, in the survey, we didn't mention that it is about LGBTIQ people, but we just said in these countries, it might be possible for single parents. And we know at the moment this discussion in Poland, but we have it also in Hungary, where single parent adoption was now infringed. Yes, because now it is necessary to have a political decision. So it's not the institution of adoption that will decide on a professional way, but it will be a political decision who will become foster parents. And of course, in this situation in Hungary, same-sex parents won't be ready to apply for foster care or for adoption in this case. And here again, 7 countries don't provide foster care for LGBTIQ parents. That means many children are deprived of their right to find an adequate, possible caregiver, and they don't have the full choice. We must state this map here is a little bit, insufficient, because we know that not every foster care system is as good as others. So we know, for example, from activists in Slovenia, yes, there is the possibility of people, of LGBTIQ couples, to apply for foster care, but the foster care system is not as good. So you need also, of course, a system where you as LGBTIQ people feel good and to be also accompanied by professionals. That is very important. Well, here is the point where we turn to the European Union and the freedom of movement of LGBTIQ people, because one of Nelfer's missions is not only to advance the rights in all the member states of the European Union and beyond, but also to look if there are problems within the European Union and to move between the countries. And we have a lot of cross-border problems. There is a directive that states that EU citizens and their family members have the right to move freely and to live in another EU country. But the terms for family members are gender neutral, but still it is not clear if rainbow families are included. There is a directive that covers words. For example, the spouse means married people, partners in a registered partnership with an EU citizen, and direct descendants under the age of 21. But it's still not clear if, for example, same-sex spouse is completely included. We have, interestingly, in 2018, we had a very big...
Ja to też robiłam.
Hello, do you hear me? Yes, I will continue, yes. So we have this Komen case, which was a very big case in Luxembourg at the European Court of Justice, where it was clarified that the term spouse is also including same-sex spouses. So that could mean that same-sex marriage is recognized by EU law in every EU country. But we learned that even this is a major achievement in the European framework. We know that at the end, this doesn't mean a lot. We learned after the Komen case, because we thought, well, it's now the starting point to accept all different kinds of civil documents stating that there is a civil union and this should be also recognized in every country, or a birth certificate that should be recognized in every country. But it's not so. In a meeting we had in late 2019, it showed that only really a handful of countries would provide for this recognition of certificates that were already issued in another EU country. And these countries were all these countries where these laws already exist. So it is not so crazy new that they will provide for that possibility. And there is now a very, very new study on obstacles to the free movement of rainbow families, and some results now here, because normally it will be presented next Monday. You see here the recognition of same-sex marriages contracted abroad. So after the Komen case, it should be okay if you are married in Germany, that your marriage will be also accepted, fully accepted in Poland or in Romania or Bulgaria. And you see here are some countries, also in the eastern part of Europe, unfortunately, they only permit residence in theory. So sometimes it was also then stated by a court decision at the end that this must be provided. But it doesn't mean a lot. It just means that if you are married, you will be able to move to Poland, but in Poland, you won't be recognized as married. All the provisions, all these purposes that are connected to marriage in Poland, I don't know, yes, tax credits, all the other benefits will disappear because you can't be recognized as married because of constitutional limitations. So there is a lack of possibility to take your rights into another country. And even between the countries, it's sometimes difficult where marriage equality exists. So here, France, for example, is one of these countries where, for example, if you get married in Finland, you can't be directly recognized because in Finland, sometimes people had a civil union before and then got married. And if you just convert your civil union into a marriage and then go to France, this won't be recognized because you don't have another ceremony on a wedding ceremony. So there are some tiny gaps that, yes, makes your life completely, takes you in a legal limbo situations. And the same for those countries who provide now for civil unions. You won't be recognized as married. In Italy, for example, that you will be downgraded to a civil union. And of course, this means sometimes to lose your parental rights. You had already in Belgium, for example, or in Austria. But when you live now as a couple in Italy, you will lose these rights, even you had it before. And sometimes this means also the problem, if you had already an adopted child, then it will be difficult in another country to have this right to have adopted children, because this would mean you need to be married. But if you don't recognized as married couple, then it will be difficult to grant the rights to your adopted children. This is really very crazy. And the same for the recognition of partnerships. Yes, the lower form of same-sex relations, I would say. And even in those Western countries like Ireland or France or Portugal, other civil unions are not recognized. In Portugal, for example, because they introduced directly marriage equality in 2016, so they didn't know same-sex partnerships. And yes, so there's no legal framework for it. So if you are a same-sex couple from Hungary and you want to move to Portugal, you have no possibility to do that. And you see once again, of course, yes, these Eastern countries who don't provide for anything, only they will facilitate you in so-called durable relationships. So if you can provide a proof that you live already together, then you might have the chance to get a residence permit, but this doesn't mean that you are granted rights you had before as a couple. So, and we have, as Nelfer, a lot of those cases right now, and you see some of these families around with children who try to move from one country to another. The second family here, for example, is a Polish-Irish couple with baby Sophia. And this is a case actually at the European Court of Justice, where the question is, once again, if they had a birth certificate from Spain, this should be also recognized in Poland, and the legal ties between the mothers and the child can't cease to exist, but they do actually. And this is now questioned, and there's another case concerning a Bulgarian Gibraltese couple with a child. And the problem here is that the child remains stateless. It remains stateless because both of the parents are foreigners in Spain, and to obtain Spanish citizenship for the child, they need to register the child in their home countries. But both of the countries, Poland, because they don't transcribe birth certificates stating two mothers, and the same for the Irish woman, they don't provide for this possibility. Both of them had no possibility to register the child, and the Spanish authorities said, well, then we don't have the right to register the child. That means for more than 1.5 years, the child was stateless, couldn't travel with his parents, wasn't able to get an health insurance. So a really very, very vulnerable situation. Finally, there was a way in Spain. They have a little rule in their laws. If any country will provide for a registration of the child, then Spain can give citizenship. But this is after a certain procedure. This takes, yes, in this case, 1.5 years, and sometimes even longer. So we have very, very stupid situations in this European framework. And these are the countries also from that new presentation that will be shown on Monday. These are the countries where problems are reported or declared by the countries, or where problems are expected. And you see, yes, it is about European Union countries. Only very few countries like the Netherlands or Spain, yes, the situation seems to be for families with children, okay, but the others will have problems to recognize the existing family. Additional burdens. So when we reflect rainbow families and their rights, of course, we need to know, yes, children face a lot of problems besides the specific right they should have. Just, yes, to mention it here, about hostility, bullying, prejudice, ignorance, in a lot of cases, yes, and you know it so well, I guess, also in Poland, in so many situations where civil servants are hostile, or words of politicians, they call you a threat to society. There are wrong accusations, yes, of pedophilia, reasons for earthquakes or something like that, really stupid things, biased questions. And if they are possibly, of course, connected to the parents and they mean the LGBTIQ people, it will, of course, also touch the children in rainbow families. So children are always deprived of their rights, of the non-discrimination by association to their parents, best interests, education, so the respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms, understanding, tolerance, whenever this happens. So children's rights are always touched by the discrimination of LGBTIQ parents. Also inexperience, ignorance. Yes, computer says no. In so many cases, it is also just a bureaucratic hurdle. It is not about the general problem to be accepted in some countries. But you have always this question if it's father and mother or parent one, parent two. And this is such a highly emotional debate. And of course, this touches children and their non-discrimination that is infringed. Additional questions. So for me, also interesting because it isn't reflected so much in the rainbow map of ILGA Europe, the question of children's rights connected to assisted reproductive techniques. So of course, for rainbow families, it is a question of equal rights at the very first stage. So if a different sex couple has a possibility to get access to assisted reproductive techniques, to treatment in a clinic, IVF, then it should be also provided for same-sex couples. But it isn't the case. So you see here only not the half of the European Union countries provide for that possibility. Even we have now such debates and laws, legislational proposals in France, for example. In Switzerland, we have a discussion in Germany, but there is still a problem. And the same for the question if singles may have the same access to assisted reproductive techniques than couples. And the question if it should be only provided for married couples or for unmarried couples, and who get funding, only the married ones or also the others. So this is the question. And the same for surrogacy. Yes, also here, whenever there is a country, there are not so many countries that provide for surrogacy in the European world. In the European Union, there's only one country for same-sex couples where this is really open and regulated. This is the UK. And we have two countries, additional countries, where there are no legal frameworks, but possibilities. In Belgium, for example, very restricted, altruistic surrogacy with very good friends or relatives. And the same situation also for the Netherlands. There's actually a bill that is discussed to open very tightly restricted surrogacy for Dutch people, Dutch same-sex couples, as well as different sex couples, but this is still a bill. What does it mean for the children? And one of these questions is, of course, which donor concept is behind this? And we have a very different view on this. And also when I talk to people, they have very different meanings. It depends on the cultural background. So in some countries you have more the argumentation that the children need to know their genetic origins and they have the right to have this. In other countries, it's still the case that anonymous donation is given as the possibility for assisted reproductive techniques. For example, in Spain, it's very clear it should be anonymous. To protect sperm donors, yes, so that there won't be charged with any parental custody rights or with alimony at the end. And also to ensure that there are still sperm donors who do that, because others would be perhaps question the whole procedure when they need to provide too much information on them. But we have a shift here. So more and more countries understand that there is a need to provide the rights to know the genetic origins. And it is also a concept since 2019 within the European Council of Europe. There's a resolution that states that children should have the right to know who was the one, yes, who is the biological link, yes, who is the father, who's the mother. And you see, it is still a complicated patchwork situation here. And this, again, gives a problematic situation, for example, for cross-border situations. Sometimes if a country says, yes, well, we will provide the possibility for you to be connected to your child legally from the beginning, if you accept this certain treatment, then other treatments abroad won't be recognized. And if your family ceased to exist just by crossing a border because you used a certain treatment, then it's also difficult. And this is another aspect of this. Today, we still try, and the political systems still try to punish parents for a certain type of assisted reproductive technique. So, for example, of course, surrogacy is forbidden in most of the European countries. But if you do it abroad, you have the possibility, of course, to do that. And these children and these families exist. And so our approach is mostly that we say when this family exists, they should be protected. But if you use a certain assisted reproductive technique like surrogacy or a certain type of treatment for lesbian couples, and you will be punished because you used this method, and sometimes it is punished with a non-recognition of the legal ties between these new intended parents and the child. This could not be the right thing, because it will, yes, infringe the rights on the child for a second time. So perhaps the first time is, yes, perhaps they don't know their biological link, but to say, yes, now we will punish the parents for this moral or ethical problem, yes, and that they used such a method. The second infringement is, of course, then not to recognize the existing legal ties to the parents. Yes, well, this is once again for surrogacy. There is a really very difficult approach to this on the European level. There was a report in 2016, a condemnation for profit surrogacy, but a possibility perhaps for surrogacy in a very restricted altruistic gestational surrogacy framework means a good friend, a relative could be the one who bear the child for you. But, and whatever you think about it, it's not so relevant at the end, because when we look now again at the perspective of the child, a child cannot be blamed for being born out of a surrogacy arrangement. So whatever you think about the parents and whatever they did, at the end there is a child and it has two parents. They live with the child. So if you are just saying, well, then yes, for the child, it's a pity, but perhaps you must think twice and think to establish relationships, legal relationships between children and parents. And yeah, by ignoring a little bit that difficult moral situation. And there is, at the end, interestingly, an advisory opinion of the European Court of Human Rights that asks, or was asked for this question, and said at the end, yes, we are in favor of a recognition of intended parents after a surrogacy arrangement. Means, and for example, this was then the case in France, they decided on a direct transcription of birth certificates from abroad, so from the US or from Canada, to, yes, at the end, to establish a legal tie between a child and the parents, the intended parents, for the well-being and the best interests of the child. The last question to this is multi-parenting. So there are actually only 2 countries that provide at least for a discussion. So to have more than 2 parents. In Germany, for example, there's now a trend that same-sex couples, so lesbian couples, gay couples, or singles and a couple come together and create a family. Because they don't want to go through a surrogacy arrangement, or they don't want to go through any treatment in a clinic. They want to get their child together. But the question is, who gets the legal ties? And actually, in the whole European framework, it is only possible for 2 parents to become legally connected to the child. And in the Netherlands, and also now discussed in Finland, there's the question, if we have already those families where more than 2 parents are really on an everyday basis parents to the child, then it could be also good and for the best interest of the child to give, for example, custody rights, or at least some pragmatic rights to those parents who are involved. But we have actually no country that provides already for this. This is just discussed, and we have some additional plans and possibilities here, but I don't want to get too much into the details now. So for the summary, my key messages at the end are that children are in rainbow families still very vulnerable and deprived of rights, discriminated against whenever their LGBTIQ parents can't register their relationships, get married, adopt, foster, become jointly legal parents. They are particularly in legal limbo in cross-border situations in the EU. They often don't have access to adequate education and are targets of hate speech and bullying. They suffer from hypocrisy around the access to assisted reproductive techniques, including surrogacy, and non-experience with diverse family forms. So, and yes, thank you for your attention. This was much too long. No, it's about, okay, it's 1 hour. So it's free.
1 hour sharp.
Yes. So it's free for you to raise questions or to ask something, and we can discuss it also on a very cozy way. So I'm not your teacher. I'm just a participant of the discussion now.